My life experiences are proof. They are evidence that I am capable and competent enough to create a successful future for myself. I've had many monumental highs throughout my life, moments of incredible, spectacular achievement. I've been told in my life from others that they have high hopes for me, that their expectations are high for me, and that they could see me going very far in life. If you look at the highs in my life, they would seem to indicate a bright future. They would seem to indicate that I'm going to make something of this one life that I have. The problem is that mental illness has interrupted these highs and presented a myriad of lows. Mental illness has been a big bane of my existence. Mental illness has, on more than one occasion, been a catalyst for my downfall. It's almost as if life, it's like a never ending cycle of rising and plummeting. And it makes me wonder, is it even worth pursuing the apex of the world's tallest mountain, given my past history of collapsing every single time and falling down into the abyss of despair? In this video, I want to talk about some pivotal moments in my life, periods of time where I was successful, and periods of time where I lost time as a result of mental illness. Mental illness interfering with me becoming entangled with the stressors and symptoms that come with mental illness. And I'm going to describe and delineate how those stressors, how those symptoms have devastated my circumstances on so many occasions. And so the first example that we have to go to ninth grade. I missed the entire second half of my ninth grade year of high school. I also missed the entire first half of my second ninth grade year of high school. And it was for a few reasons. I was being severely bullied. I didn't know it at the time, but I would later be diagnosed with a condition called hyperhidrosis, which causes you to sweat at abnormal rates compared to the average person, even for the most minimal of physical activity. So I would sweat at disproportionate rates compared to my peers, and it was noticeable, and people would comment on how much I'm sweating. And the worst aspect of it was the sweat would stain my clothes, and my clothes would then contain a foul odor. I remember getting one comment from someone saying to somebody else, like, oh, at least at a funeral they use some kind of spray or chemicals to cover up the smell of the body. And that's what Tyler has to do. Something to that effect. Whenever I stood up from a chair, a desk, the chair would be soaked in sweat. My armpits would be soaked in sweat, always. No matter how much cologne or deodorant I apply to my body, I just could not mask the smell. And later on in life, I would solve this, but at the time, I didn't know that I had this condition of hyperhidrosis. And this condition significantly exacerbated symptoms of an already existing phenomena I was dealing with, which is social anxiety, as well as generalized anxiety. My anxiety was so astronomically high, I would feel at times like I was about to fall out of my desk. I remember once in English class, I volunteered to read one of the characters' lines in Romeo and Juliet, and I read the first line, and I was so choked up, so out of breath. I remember reading the line, barely finishing that line, and then I said, "Someone else?" And like the whole class burst out laughing, and it was more of a laughing at me. Uh, if I had played my cards right, it could have been a, laughing with me type of deal. But I was so socially awkward and out of it at the time that I was so deviating from the norm that it never occurred to me that I could have made that a moment where people were laughing with me. So they were laughing at me. And the teacher, one who had high hopes for me actually, told them to stop, and they stopped. And that was that. But that's just to give you a glimpse of the kind of anxiety that I was experiencing. That was to give you a glimpse of the hyperhidrosis and the sweat and how that exacerbated the symptoms of my anxiety, because whenever I stood up from a chair, I would, quickly try to like wipe down the chair, and people would look at me crazy for that. But I figured it was a better alternative than people knowing that I was soaked in sweat, which they could see. It was visible anyways. Now, I had to repeat the ninth grade, of course, because, well, I missed the entire second half of that first ninth grade year. Now, a pivotal thing happened in my second ninth grade year. I got the hyperhidrosis diagnosis. I got treatment for the hyperhidrosis diagnosis, and the treatment worked. I discovered ways to actually mask the smell and alleviate the foulness of the odor to where it wasn't noticeable, and so people didn't have anything to laugh at or belittle me for at that particular moment in time. It still wasn't easy. I remember before that, one thing that was eluding me that I meant to mention was I was moving back and forth between my mom's house and various cousins' houses, and moving over and over again because of that hyperhidrosis. It obviously affected my academics in an extremely negative way. I wasn't in the classroom learning, which is what I should have been doing. And I just moved back and forth because that was the only solution I could devise to temporarily escape from the problem. And each time I would move, there would be a few day period where I didn't have to go to school. And even so, I was missing school constantly because of this condition. Well, second ninth grade year, I got a diagnosis, I got treatment, and the treatment worked. Thank God for that diagnosis. Finally, somebody believed me when I talked about how much I was sweating. So many adults would call me crazy. Members of my own family would call me hysterical for saying that I was sweating too much, and saying that I was crazy about it. Like I was just imagining these things, that these comments people were making to me weren't really happening. And so imagine being in that position. What perspective and outlook would you have towards those around you if that's what they were saying to you? People weren't even believing me. So with hyperhidrosis out of the way, I now was able to get back in the classroom to some extent. I was assigned a private teacher, a retired teacher, who would help me catch up on my work, because remember, I missed the entire first half of the second ninth grade year as well. And because of my diagnosis, the school helped me formulate a plan of action that got me caught up with all my assignments, and I finished the year with exceptionally high marks, so much so that the following year, sophomore year, I took on all honors classes, all accelerated classes. So I was in the remedial classes that ninth grade year that I missed half the year, and now I was in all honors classes. So I would be so important for me to be in the classroom on every day of school that there was. And that's pretty much what I did. I think I missed one day. I did only miss one day that entire sophomore year, and it's because I was physically ill and didn't feel up to going in. But of course, I got my work made up and what have you. Sophomore year was a phenomenal success. My sophomore year, I actually got elected class president, which was significant for me because this is a group of people I had only known for this one year. And at the end of the year, they evidently liked me enough, trusted me enough to put their faith in me and give me that leadership position of class president, which was a huge boost to my self-esteem. It bolstered my confidence, and it brought me to a place where I felt happy and content. I was getting straight A pluses in all my classes that sophomore year. I was the winner of the inaugural Poetry Out Loud school competition, and I advanced all the way to the semifinals, which was significant because this kind of marked the beginning of my public speaking experience competitively. At the end of sophomore year, during which I was medicated on a medication for anxiety, Zoloft, which is significant. During the summer following that sophomore year, I discovered a test. Now, I'm not going to go into too much specific detail about this test, but it was an intelligence evaluation, and that evaluation essentially said that I wasn't the intelligent person that everybody else perceived me to be, that I perceived myself to be because of those perceptions of others. And it took a huge hit to my self esteem, and I became obsessed with this idea of increasing intelligence. And I became so diligent and committed towards researching increasing intelligence. And my research wasn't exactly top tier, let's put it that way. One of the decisions I made, which was very foolhardy, is that I quit my Zoloft medication cold turkey because I read online that one of the side effects can be like that it impairs your focus and your ability to like lock in on a specific task, to focus on a task at hand. And I perceived that as part of intelligence, and I made the unintelligent decision to stop a drug cold turkey. So going into junior year, I was now questioning my self-worth. I was questioning my intellectual abilities and whether or not I could handle the course load I had, whether I could handle the leadership position I now had. And fear, doubt, and uncertainty just overwhelmed me. I don't even think I made it through 2 full weeks of school. I maybe made it 8 days into the school year. I can't exactly remember, but I ended up leaving, going home, and I was starting to have feelings of taking my own life, and it was brutal. I just ended up having my mom sign the dropout papers, and thankfully I didn't act on those beliefs that I had, but that wouldn't be the case forever. It was an ephemeral occurrence, very short lasting, because later on, in the not too distant future, I would make an attempt at my life. But before we get to that, the dropout papers were signed. So here you have a class president, straight A plus student, dropping out of high school because he was overwhelmed with social anxiety because he quit his anxiety medication, which was due to fears that it would impair his focus and diminish his intellect. So it was a series of consequential decisions that led up to this moment. During my 2-year dropout period, I put on lots of weight. I spent months indoors. It was actually the time that I started really socially isolating for extended periods of time. The only time I would leave the house is to occasionally see family somewhere whenever they would visit, go to a restaurant or something, but that was very rare. I was locked indoors for extended periods of time, socially isolating, catastrophizing, saying that my life is over, and I was drowning in negative self-talk and racing thoughts. There was one moment where I went to a nearby park, and I just thought to myself while standing in the sun, what happened to me? I don't recognize who I am anymore. When I looked in the mirror before I left, I don't recognize the face that I see looking back at me. And in that moment, I decided that I was going to start taking steps to eventually return to high school, that I was going to get things right, that I was going to do things correctly, and that I was going to do everything within my power over the course of time that I had left in my dropout period, to work and save money, to prepare myself for my return to high school, to make sure that I was spiritually ready, financially ready. And so that's exactly what I did. I got a job as a cashier at a retail store, worked that for a decent amount of time, saved up a bunch of money, and then used that money to fund my return to school. So now we're at the point where I return to high school. I'm a junior once more, and I'm much older. I was a dropout for 2 years, and on top of that, remember, I also had that year where I repeated the 9th grade, so I'm technically now 3 years older than my peers. My classmates were 3 years younger than me on average. And it was awkward being in a classroom with the younger siblings of people that I had known that I would have graduated with, had I not dropped out or had I not stayed back. And that alone was highly diminishing to my self-esteem. That alone robbed me of a great deal of confidence and made me feel out of place. Going into that school year, I was still not on any medication, which was a foolhardy decision once more. And this is where the feelings of wanting to take my life came back. I felt out of place. I was having that feeling of not being able to get out of my desk without falling, and I can't read in class without having an anxiety attack. And what's weird is that I think mania was there too, to some degree. There was an element of euphoric energy. Early into the school year, I would stay awake for days. I remember in advanced placement in U.S. history, we had a debate during the colonial times, like Revolutionary War, whether we should go to war with Britain, something to that effect. And I spent all night brainstorming the potential arguments that the other side would make. And then I had prepared rebuttals for every potential argument. And then when the debate day came and it was my opportunity to give a closing statement, I had a little checklist of the arguments they made. I checked them off and took a mental note in my head, and it gave off the appearance that I was rebuttaling on the spot spontaneously. And it was very effective, and people came up to me, and after class they said, "You should join the mock trial team." And I did end up doing that eventually, but it didn't happen right away. The next thing that happened is that loss of sleep continued, the interruption in my sleeping patterns continued, the desire to be excellent in all things, but also the fear of being in school combined in a very nefarious way and was highly detrimental to my health. There was one day where I just decided I'm not fit for this. I can't do this. I'm part of the proletariat. I am a lesser. I am part of the other. I'm not an intelligent person. I'm not capable of achieving my dreams. And so I actually made a journal entry talking about my decision to soon take my life. And then I went to the park and made an effort to do so. I'm not going to describe exactly what I did, but one thing I did was I called the police at exactly 3:33 p.m. and I told them to send an ambulance to pick up my body. The police came and had a very compassionate response. They didn't have their weapons drawn or anything to that effect. They talked me out of that decision, and ultimately the main driver that made me not decide to do this was the fear of religious consequences. I've always been a highly religious person, and to this day I believe that God was in my corner that day, kind of drawing attention to the scripture and the consequences of what taking my own life would entail. And those consequences seem to outweigh the value I placed on in taking my own life and underestimating the value of my own life. I was taken to the hospital, evaluated. I told them about everything, about how I didn't feel intelligent, about the test I had that summer years ago, how I was a dropout for 2 years, how I'm not on anxiety medication anymore. And they released me on the condition that I attend a partial hospitalization program. And this program was pivotal to my comeback. Not only did I participate in group therapy, which shifted my perspective in a positive direction, I also was placed on medication again, Zoloft. And that social anxiety medication dramatically changed the way that I approached things. It empowered me to perform to the best of my abilities and utilize every capacity at my disposal in order to be effective and competent in the tasks that I do. And so there was a period of time where I was now attending school consistently and Junior year was somewhat of a success. There was still periods of time where I feel like I had minor hypomanic episodes, which would take me out of school, and I seemed to get frustrated very easily. And I think that these were early signs of bipolar. I can't say definitively because I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a doctor, but they do say, psychiatrists will say that lots of these SSRIs or like anti-anxiety pills, they can induce mania in people who have bipolar. At the time, I just had a diagnosis of depression and anxiety. I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar. And so being on this medication, I think that it did induce many episodes, which took me out of school, but then I would return, get caught up again. I was super diligent and committed to being on top of everything, even when I missed school. And it showed in the results and outcome. On the mock trial team, we swept our division for the first time in school history and went to the playoffs for the first time in school history. And I played a huge role in that. I was the person who gave opening statements as well as performed direct examination of witnesses. That was a huge confidence booster. There was also the fact that in my advanced placement courses, both of them, I scored perfect scores of 5 on both of my advanced placement exams. That was an extreme boost to my confidence. Going into senior year, it seemed like everything was in place. It seemed like everything was going to work out. And senior year was kind of a continuation of junior year, where I would have these mixed mini episodes that took me out of school, but I would still be successful. The mock trial season wasn't as successful this time, but I had a lot of success outside the classroom. I participated in a speech competition that began with 900 student speakers across the state, and it dwindled down to 5 finalists, and I was one of those 5 finalists. I ended up winning first, but I was one of the final 5 out of 900 people for a public speaking contest, and that was a huge milestone for me, given that I'm so passionate about public speaking. I also participated in DECA, which is a business competition which provides high school students and college students opportunities to learn and become competent in different areas of business like marketing, finance, sports management, hospitality and tourism, different areas. I chose business finance. I knew nothing about business finance when I chose that category. And in my first and only year of doing DECA, I won first place in my district. So District 7 of Massachusetts, I won first place. And then I won first place at the Massachusetts State Conference, first place in the state. And I remember this making newspapers. There were news reporters at the school who came in to interview me. I would be called out of class saying that, oh, there's a reporter from this news agency who wants to speak with you. And I still have those newspapers. They're hanging on my fridge. But that was an extreme confidence boost. I had all these successes, and what was guiding and driving me outside of the classroom was this desire to go to UMass Amherst. That was the huge thing. I wanted to get into UMass Amherst. I feel like being in that school would present the best opportunity for me to turn my life around and truly start over, to have a fresh start, and to have a phenomenal future for myself. And I did it. I got accepted to UMass Amherst. So the highlight of 11th and 12th grade years is that there was still that element of impulsivity. It was in my company, so to speak. But it didn't prevent me from being successful inside and outside the classroom, successful enough anyways to get into my top university choice. Freshman and sophomore year at UMass Amherst were a resounding success. Freshman year, I tried out for and made it onto the highly competitive mock trial team. We won our first tournament of the season. I got elected to the Student Government Association as a student senator. I served on the Faculty Senate program and Budget Council. I was getting high marks in all my courses, and I was taking a heavy credit load at like 19 credits or something like that my freshman year. Sophomore year, similar thing, but it was a little different because we got sent home for COVID lockdowns. And so one semester was online. And then the following semester, spring 2021, I went to campus, and it was still like a dead campus because most students chose to stay home an additional semester. COVID was still going around. It was still affecting a lot of people, and I caught COVID, but after quarantine, I decided to start rushing different fraternities to try and make some social connections and have some friends for the first time in a long time, which I desperately craved because I hadn't really spoken to anybody outside of classes since we were sent home for lockdowns, and I lost a lot of friends as a result of that. I was no longer on the mock trial team, I was no longer in student government, and I thought that Greek life would be a good outlet for me to make informed friendships once more. And I ended up rushing a fraternity called Kappa Sigma. I got a bid, I accepted that bid, and over the course of the next few months, I formed some of the closest friendships that I had. I know there's like that stereotype people say that, oh, in Greek life you're paying for friends, and I can understand the premise of it, but I don't agree with it. I mean, you pay money to be part of any club or organization in order to like fund events, activities, and that's what the money's used for. It's not the actual buying of friends. And there's no, you still have to put in the work to become close to the people around you, and that's what I did. So I was part of this fraternity on campus, the largest fraternity on campus. And the following school year, so we're now in fall 2021, I actually moved into the fraternity house. I had been initiated at this point. I was an active brother, and because of my hard work and diligence during the pledge process, I actually had the second highest amount of points in the house. We chose rooms based on how many points we have. So I chose the room right next to the Grandmaster's room, and I chose it as a single, so I didn't have to have a roommate. I thought that this would be a decision that would be positive for me, and it certainly wasn't the reason why I had a downfall, but I think things actually could have been a lot worse had I had a roommate. Nonetheless, I'm still living in a house. Here I am, living in a house with 23 other guys. It's a party house. We throw parties typically 3 days a week, sometimes during the school week on weekdays, depending on certain circumstances. And I ended up losing lots of sleep. And I believe that this was a huge trigger of what would later become a 6-month-long manic episode. And it was during this experience that I would learn I have a diagnosis called bipolar disorder. Early semester, things were going well. I was managing the social media account and actively growing the account, getting us positive attention in the press, and advancing campaigns that try to make a difference in Greek life and campus at large. So I ran a sexual assault awareness campaign, and that post is still up. And it was actually talked about in the New York Times. I got interviewed by the New York Times because of that campaign that I launched. And I put a lot of passion into it because it's something that I could personally relate to from a past experience, a traumatic event from when I was a kid. I poured my heart into it, and it paid off. It became the most liked post in the history of the account. It still is to this day. Received tens of thousands of views, many more impressions, and it was covered in the New York Times, and it had a positive reception around campus. The account was flooded with messages from primarily women saying that they're so proud of us that we did this, they're grateful that we did this, that there was people saying that it made them cry reading the statement that I put out, and everything else that went along with that project. It was extremely comprehensive, and I led a team of about 14 people in order to produce the final outcome of how that project came about, how the final outcome of that project. I started experiencing delusions and hallucinations during that fall semester. I believe they were induced by losing sleep. They certainly weren't helped by the fact that I was drinking excessive amounts of alcohol, smoking weed regularly. Weed can be known to induce psychosis. The astronomical amounts of alcohol I drank were actually to cope with the symptoms that I was experiencing of the delusions and hallucinations. So they weren't the initial trigger, in my view, of the symptoms of delusions and hallucinations. It was actually the loss of sleep that primarily played that role. But I do believe even in a perfect world where none of this happened, where I wasn't losing sleep, getting a solid night's rest, wasn't drinking alcohol, wasn't smoking weed, I still believe that I would have been diagnosed with bipolar at some point. I could have delayed the episode, could have had a more minor episode, caught it sooner, take more proactive action, but that's not what happened. And I dealt with the consequences as a result. Over the course of those 6 months, I got expelled by my university. I lost multiple jobs. I lost a high paying internship working as a marketing intern for a chamber of commerce. And I lost relationships. People started to distance themselves from me because of the crazy things I was saying in person and posting online. And to this day, I do feel terrible about it, even though they were things that were arguably beyond my control given the impairment of the bipolar disorder and the mania with psychosis. I got hospitalized at the beginning of it, and then I was sent to partial hospitalization towards the tail end of the episode as well. And so it had a lot of consequences. And once I reached the PHP, that's the turning point where I started to regain my sanity, and I would enter the earliest stage of regaining my stability. I didn't become stable immediately, but I did regain my sanity rather quickly. I remember March of 2022, I was on a medication called Abilify for just a few weeks, and just in those few weeks, I was regaining my acumen. I was able to exercise discernment and be discriminating in terms of what is reality, what is not reality, what is true, what is false. I started to recognize that my past behaviors, actions, thoughts, beliefs, delusions of grandeur, hallucinations, that they weren't grounded in reality. And it hit me like a Mack truck. Felt like I had been run over. And I was now drowning in racing thoughts because of those traumatic experiences from the manic episode, because of the paranoia I had during that manic episode. The PHP in many ways was an epiphany moment, because it sent me into a state of emotional turmoil, which I know sounds a little strange, but it was necessary. It was necessary for me to get out of that mania state. It was necessary for me to learn lessons from that manic state and to recognize how crucially important it is that I treat and take medication for my bipolar disorder. The road to recovery was incredibly long and arduous. It didn't happen overnight. For years, I was drowning in racing thoughts, beating myself up about things I had said and done. During my recovery, I would reach out to people I had interacted with during mania multiple times, and in an effort to assuage the hostility or animosity that may or may not have still existed. And I spoke with some, others wasn't able to speak with, but that's okay. And universally, they were understanding and accepting of what I had gone through, and didn't seem to pass judgment, didn't seem to harbor any ill will. And that felt like a huge relief as well. It took a lot of stress off my shoulders, huge burden off my shoulders. And I can now kind of not fully move on, but I could move on from this idea that my relationships were permanently damaged. I was able to restore relationships with family. Eventually, I would reach a state of 354 pounds, and make no mistake about it, it's from overeating and not moving enough. But those behaviors were exacerbated by the bipolar medications that I was taking. The bipolar medications that I was taking, a lot of them had mild to moderate weight gain listed as side effects, and I sure experienced at the very least moderate, perhaps enormous amount, because I went from 180 to 354. I was 180 at the end of my manic episode in March 2022, and by December 2023 I weighed 354 pounds. That is an astronomical amount of weight to put on in such an ephemeral period of time, and I did so. And I've been able to get some of that weight off. I'm trying to do things to expedite the weight loss journey, but it's tough, it's arduous, it's not easy. I'm doing my best every day to just try to have a positive perspective and to be grateful for how far I've come compared to where I was. I thought I would never go to college again. My attempts at being reinstated as a student to UMass Amherst failed, and that really hit me hard. But I was able to transfer to a different university, and this new university was accepting and welcoming me. They were understanding of my circumstances. They were accepting of me for who I am and for who I was, and thought that I would be a good student, and so they accepted me as a student when I applied as a transfer student. I had to explain my expulsion and everything else, and it was tough. It wasn't an easy task to talk about those things with other people, and I think it was made easier by the fact that during a lot of this recovery process, I was posting videos to my YouTube channel talking about my bipolar disorder experiences. I have 101 videos on my bipolar breakdown playlist where I talk about my experiences with bipolar. And it means the world to me that people are watching them still, even when I don't post. It means the world to me that people are finding them beneficial in some way. It means the world to me that they're having a positive influence in the lives of others. And I cannot thank you enough. So I just want to end by saying that not all is doom and gloom. I'm returning to college. I'm actually taking 3 summer classes. They're accelerated classes because the summer is a shorter semester, but they're just 3 classes, so I think I'll be able to manage. And then I'll be returning in the fall, doing a mix of online and in person. My summer classes are going to be exclusively online. I have stability once again. I'm not necessarily ecstatic and super happy, but I'm content. I'm okay with where I'm at. I'm definitely grateful for where I'm at compared to where I was. Most notably, when I say not all is doom and gloom, what I mean is that I no longer have anhedonia. The inability to experience pleasure, that is anhedonia. That was a monumental feeling I had during my recovery. I couldn't get enjoyment out of anything. Reading books, playing video games, going for walks, nothing did the trick at all. I would wake up fully rested and not feel 1% better. But I'm past that. And for anyone out there struggling, I want you to know that you can get past this too. I thought 1000% that my life was over. I did get hit by a Mack truck, but I recovered. When an athlete has a physical injury, they don't go back on the court or field right away. They take the time to recover, and it does take time. Recovery doesn't happen overnight. I mean, this was a 6-month-long manic episode in my situation. Whatever your situation may be, everybody follows their own timeline. Everybody's going to take a different amount of time to recover. Some people less, some people more. Some people significantly less, some people significantly more, but that's okay. What matters is that you're being proactive in your recovery. What matters is that you understand that it's not your fault that you have this illness or condition. What matters is to know that you matter and that you're not alone, that there's people who do care about you and who want you to succeed. And one of the best pieces of advice I can give, something that helped me overcome the embarrassment and shame of my manic episode, is the recognition that people are so preoccupied and busy with their own lives, it's highly unlikely that they're thinking about something you did months, years, weeks, days ago, because they're just focused on themselves. And so why be so hard on yourself and beat yourself up about what other people think when they're, I can almost guarantee, are not thinking about you anymore? And I know that could kind of be seen as a negative too, like, oh, nobody's thinking about me, but no. It's a good thing that they're not thinking about you in that negative way, remembering you in that negative state. Because I broadcast my feelings and behaviors all across my community and social media platforms when I was manic. And so it was tough to overcome that embarrassment and shame, but I was able to do it. I managed it, I persisted. And that's what I'll end with, is a quote for those in recovery. It's a quote by President Calvin Coolidge. Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. That's all I got, everybody. Love, light, and tranquility to all.